Hello, everyone, and welcome to Coming Home, Survive and Thrive in Homeschooling. Today, I am really thrilled to be interviewing Kathryn from the Charlotte Mason Institute. She's based in Charlotte, North Carolina in the US, and I will leave her to tell you exactly what that means. Welcome to you, Kathryn.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, as Christine said, I work for the Charlotte Mason Institute, and I'm just delighted to be here to talk more about Charlotte Mason, her philosophy, and just the way that is bringing and can bring so much life and richness to education for our students and ourselves today.
Thank you so much. We've got a lot to talk about. The first one I want to ask you is a very back to basics question. Yesterday, somebody said to me, Charlotte Mason, I haven't heard of her. So if you had somebody talk to you like that, what's the first thing you would say to introduce them to her ideas?
Yeah, that's such a massive question. But I think that when I think about a Charlotte Mason education, we sometimes call it a relational education. And that's coming from Charlotte Mason said, education is the science of relations or the science of relationships. And she unpacks that as relationships with God, with other people, and with the world, and also a relationship with ourselves, understanding ourselves correctly. So I think that you can in the big picture sense, you can sort of sum up a Charlotte Mason education with this goal of treating each child as a person, and the goal of education being helping them grow as a person in these relationships with God, with others, and with the world around them. And so I think that's the big picture sort of nutshell. But then I think that some of the uniqueness of a Charlotte Mason education is the way that she took that big picture nutshell and said, how does that work out in the practicals of the day-to-days? And so I think some of the sort of hallmark methods of how Charlotte Mason brought that into practice was things like narration and the idea that we only know what we can tell back and what our mind asks as a question to itself. So that anything that kid is reading or interacting with outdoors should be processed and thought about and reflected on by telling back what happened and discussing and having your mind work on it in some way. And so things like narration, things like living books, right? We don't want kids to just read just compendiums of facts in like a history textbook. We want to put them into touch with real people from time and engaging narratives and literary language. And then I think, things like short lessons, like if we're not made with attention spans to be able to last 2 hours, then it's not actually in line with how God has made us. Then we shouldn't require that of children. We should give them a variety of subjects, and we should keep those lessons short so that they can give their best attention while they are required. So I think that that's kind of the big picture. There's, so many more facets. She wrote 20 principles on education, right? And 6 volumes of her education series. So there's obviously so much more to say, but I think that education is the science of relations. We're about treating children as persons, helping them to engage with God, with the world, with others, and then doing that in ways that are respectful of their personhood, that are in line with how God has made us, both and thinking about that both theologically and scientifically.
Mm. That's a really good introduction then. So, assuming that that sounds very attractive to a parent, what's not to like, really? So, I guess to define it, then, it's a way of looking at education that's simply been named after its founder, which is Charlotte Mason. And from there on in, so there's our little quick bullet points from Kathryn. Thank you for that. So now we're drawing in the interested parents. And now I would like you to tell us, what does the Charlotte Mason Institute do? And then after that, you can tell us what it is that you do.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so the Charlotte Mason Institute, obviously named for Charlotte Mason, we're all about promoting Charlotte Mason's practices and principles for education, but then continuing to research them and think about how they are relevant for today. Because she lived in the late 19th, earliest 20th century in England, and we're obviously not in that time period today. We're in the 21st century, and we are all over the globe. So, and obviously, there's so much more science and thought that has happened in the past 100 years. So we are, sort of drawn to her approach, and we think she has a lot to say to students and educators today, but we also want to think about how that would look in the 21st century for our students in a variety of contexts. So we obviously sort of practically, we go about trying to equip students and educators and make this relational education accessible in a variety of settings, in a variety of places, through, key things like conferences, annual gatherings, virtual and in person, through obviously social media, blogs, newsletters, things like that. And then through training opportunities, through courses, certifications, and then through our curriculum, the Alviary, where we help people get those practical boots on the ground, like what can it look like to give your kids this relational education on Monday, and on Tuesday, not just theoretically in your head.
Mm-hmm. I'm drawn to what you just said in there about that Charlotte Mason is to be applied over a variety of contexts. Actually, before I go there, can you tell us what your responsibilities within the Institute are?
Yeah, sorry, I skipped that bit, I guess. Yeah.
Right.
So I am the coordinator for programs and services at the moment. So I work closely with our operations director and our executive director just to kind of make sure things are running across the organization as a whole and coming out on time and that we have a cohesive connections between everything. And then I also have my finger in a couple of pies within the actual Alviary curriculum development side as well.
Okay. You're a busy lady. So those variety of contexts, and I'm still getting my head around how to apply Charlotte Mason over all of those contexts. It makes sense, but our experience of it when we homeschooled our children going back, 15, 20 years, pre-internet days, we had no curriculum. We had to learn the principles and then develop our own curriculum. And now we have these possibilities through institutes like yourself, which I find incredibly exciting. But I'm still trying to figure out the philosophy of the Charlotte Mason way, that the parent chose what books they wanted the children to read, usually off recommended classical reading book lists, and they would set it up. And now we've got a curriculum that we can potentially go and buy, which is probably, well, in search of a better word, telling us what to do. So, and that kind of, to me, just clashes with what we understood the Charlotte Mason. So obviously my perception is not correct. So how do you take a pre-written Charlotte Mason style curriculum and deliver it in a way that her origins were, which was kind of parent developed focused? Do you mind talking through this one for a little while, please? Just get my mind straight.
Yeah, I don't know for sure. I think I think the tension is inherent even in, Charlotte Mason saying education is an atmosphere, a discipline, and a life. It's like it's a discipline. So like our habits matter and like there's structure to this, but it's a life. Or even she talks about the teacher being a guide, a philosopher, and a friend. And you're like, wow, like that sounds really good, but like what does that mean? Like I think that there is this sort of what does it look like to have flexibility and yet also structure at the same time. So yeah, so I mean, and I think that like you're saying, when I was growing up being educated with Mason's methods myself, there was just so fewer options out there. And now there's just so many resources out there that it's really exciting and overwhelming at the same time, I think. But, I think in Mason's time, right, she was selecting books. She was selecting even the page numbers for the term, right? And she was sending out exam questions to everyone that was using her curriculum. So I think that, we see what we're doing in the Alviary, especially as it's really following in line with that, where we talk about spreading the feast a lot. And we're giving those daily lesson plans, those assignments and whatnot as a tool for then parents to use and have that have so much of the burden lifted off of them so that they can focus on their particular children. They can think about adapting what they need to their particular context, their particular children. And so kind of that, like, instead of having to learn something in order to be able to do it in the first place, we want to equip you to be able to learn as you go and just feel confident that, you have something you could do on Monday, right? Even if even if all else fails, you have something you can do on Monday, even though you obviously will have to be making decisions that are best for, each particular kid or whatnot along the way. So, and then I think that like we purposely try to sort of build that structure of flexibility into the alveary, so even just the way it's set up. So we offer like individual subjects so people can purchase if they just want to try geography or they just want to try composer study or art study or whatever. So someone could just go in and buy an individual subject from us. But then we mainly offer the alveary as a membership program. And when someone becomes an alveary member, they have access to, all subjects and all grades. So we have book lists, supply lists, and then the detailed sort of daily lesson plan saying, what happened last, read this, or here's some discussion questions, narrate, like we write all of the curriculum following the style of a Mason lesson. But there's still that flexibility where if a parent comes in with a 10-year-old and they want to use sixth grade history and fourth grade science and fifth grade art or whatever else, then they have that flexibility because everything is there at their fingertips. Which I think allows parents to combine multiple kids really easily, and then move them up and down depending on where they fit. And then obviously parents can choose to substitute, completely different books entirely if they find a good one that they want to use. So we're just trying to make it, there's so many aspects, especially to homeschooling, that we just hope that the alveary is a helpful tool and provides that sort of confidence and foundation to be able to support parents as they make the best choices for their children. And then obviously in that line, we also try to be a lot more than a curriculum in that we send out weekly newsletters to members and we do office hours where we talk about things like notebooking or Plutarch or Shakespeare or stuff like that. And we have an online community that's off social media where people can ask questions and chat and share resources. And then we have a lot of other training resources that are available, teaching people what is Charlotte Mason's methods, how does she teach, dictation or recitation. So I think we've had some people that have become alveary members just for the training part and not even for the curriculum. So but I think our hope is that it's kind of like a recipe, you look at a recipe and then you make tweaks and substitutions, but having that basic outline is really helpful. It gives you a sense of where you could go and the options that you have.
That's a really good analogy, actually, treating it more as a recipe, because for most of us in the kitchen, there's the recipe, here's my tweaks.
Yes.
That explanation is helpful. Thank you so much. My mind is now sorting everything out because a parent necessarily doesn't want to start everything from scratch. Potentially that freaks somebody out. They might really love the philosophy. The philosophy is amazing. And now you're telling me I've got to go and do everything myself? Oh, too hard, too hard. So it's for that kind of parent and then the complete freewheeling parent and everything in between. So that's a wonderful reassurance. Thank you for explaining that so well. You've mentioned alveary quite a lot in here. Is that's the name of the curriculum? It's a subcategory of the Charlotte Mason Institute? Could you define what it is, please?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So alveary is just the name of our curriculum, and then we have the Blue Orchard Bee is another one of our initiatives, which is a completely free initiative that's all about supporting our neurodivergent students and educators. So that's a set of, there's videos and texts and lots of different help there. So yeah, alveary is just the name. It comes from, it means something like repository of knowledge. So kind of this like wealth of sort of feast of ideas. And then is also, it also means beehive. And it was named after the school that Charlotte Mason, I think it was the kids taught, the local kids came to the school in Ambleside and were taught there by teachers that were being trained at Charlotte Mason's House of Education. And the top of it is shaped like this sort of beehive, like hexagonal sort of shape. And so the school was sort of, and the building was affectionately called the Beehive. And you can still see it on the campus of the University of Cumbria today. And so we just sort of thought the alveary was a funny little, a tie-in to both the history of Charlotte Mason and education in Ambleside, as well as this idea of a feast and a wealth of resources for educators.
Oh, in that case.
Yes, it's all underneath the Charlotte Mason Institute is the overall educational nonprofit, and that's just our curriculum set.
Right. Okay. Then that makes perfect sense. And that's a beautiful name to have. It is so
Yeah,
cool.
it's a little esoteric, but we like it.
That suits the Charlotte Mason way as well. All right, so I'll ask some questions about how it's actually set up in there. How is your curriculum, the Charlotte Mason approach, different from other homeschooling approaches, as far as I'm thinking of like tests and questions that come to you? How does the Charlotte Mason approach differ?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to that kind of general question too of like, what is the Charlotte Mason approach? Because we're creating all of these resources with that backbone of believing that education is about relationships. Children are born persons. That's Charlotte Mason's first principle. And also Charlotte Mason's last, her 20th principle in her list is that, there's no divide between the sacred and the secular, that all of education is about growing in the knowledge of God implicitly as we learn about science and the wonders of his creation, and explicitly as we study things like Bible and church history and whatnot. So I think we're coming at curriculum development from this key philosophical approach of, we think that it's about the growth of a person, and that the children are due relationships with all sorts of subjects. So we're selecting living books, first of all, right? That we're not just scheduling stacks and stacks of textbooks on every single subject, where we're giving them engaging narratives and literary language, especially because story is so natural and native to who we are and how we learn. And narration is obviously a key part of every lesson in some form or another, whether that's orally telling back a written narration, whether that's illustrations or lab notebooks or whatever that might look like. That's integral to every lesson. And then we're working to support the teacher rather than just giving them that sort of like, here's your lecture and go take your notes. We're giving teachers the help to be the guide, philosopher, and friend that Mason wanted. So whether that's including a question at the beginning of a lesson to sort of pique students' interest, or some questions to talk about after narrating, to sort of help think about bigger ideas or whatnot, then, or a map to look at, or a composition prompt or whatnot. We're trying to help teachers find that delicate dance of what it means to actually stand aside and let children engage with these ideas themselves. So I think that the curriculum is different from other homeschool curriculums in as much as Charlotte Mason is different from other approaches to education. And then I think, when it comes to things like tests and worksheets, right, we're using exam questions like Charlotte Mason did that are trying to get at what a child knows, not what they don't know. We're not doing multiple choice exams on literature lessons or whatever. We're saying, what do you remember about, Julius Caesar? And obviously making sure those are age appropriate and developmentally appropriate along the way. Yeah, I think those are the key things.
Yes. So as an illustration then, in a common understanding of, here is a test after you've read the book. So thinking back to like my own personal public school experiences, the teacher had already worked out what the questions were, and you had to read the book and you had to answer her questions. So whether or not you passed the test had nothing to do with whether you, first of all, enjoyed the book, understood the book, saw something in the subject that wasn't even reflected in the tests, and worse still, asking you questions that you didn't even notice in the book. So, for instance, let's go with Tom Sawyer. There's so many aspects in that appeal to a child, but the test might say, how many children came and asked Tom for a turn of painting the fence? What did they eat for dinner that day? What was the population in the town that they lived in? And specific questions like that. But that may not have been what the child was reading. They may have been fascinated with that, the concept of basic human psychology and how we even got those children to paint the fence for him. But that's not in the test. Therefore, the child fails or got 50%, but it's not accurate. So when you send those tests, and I think you've already covered it actually, you're encouraging the teacher and the child to tell back what they were seeing inside the story, perhaps with some ideas to think about. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that goes right in line with Charlotte Mason's sort of famous quote that education is not about how much we know, but how much we care and about how many things we care about. And and I think that fundamental conviction of like, if we are actually born persons, then children are able to interact with ideas and they're not just these little containers walking around that need to be filled with facts. That's not what, education is about. And that's not how we work as persons either,
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Because it's a fascinating concept to think of that a child is born a person, because at first pass you're going, well, yes, that's not a dramatic thing to say. Of course it's born a person, but then when you break down, what do you mean by that, a person? And as you've just pointed out, so much of our modern education is assuming the child is born as a blank slate. Aren't we often told that? It's our job to fill them with everything. But that's not how Mason sees it at all. That's counterintuitive to the way most of us have been brought up in the West, which means we have to learn ourselves to rethink something.
Yeah.
Can you maybe reflect on how a parent, let's say the homeschool mum, goes about a change in her way of thinking and looking at education as well as she's working alongside the child? What do you have to say along that line?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where it's very freeing when she says that education is a life, because I think that is um, so, encouraging and refreshing both for us as the educators to be able to say, okay, like we are where we are, like it's a journey, and we had whatever education like experiences we had when we were younger, but here's where we are now, and then we still have years of growth ahead of us to keep thinking and keep pondering, and it's not about we have to, figure out this thing and do it perfectly or else it's not worth doing, but that we can do our best and we continue to learn along the way, um and that's okay, because I think secondly, education is a life for the kids as well, and so it's very freeing to think about the fact that it's not about how, can they recite all the presidents of this country, or did they know all, have they read all of this list of books or whatever by the time they graduate, but more, have they engaged with ideas? Have they developed a love of learning? Are they able to learn for themselves? Are they, as Nathan said, are they in touch with interesting things no matter where they go, right? Do they have these relationships with God and with others in the world? Um, because then it becomes less about, well, oh no, I didn't read, the Iliad, and are they going to be okay? And it becomes more it's okay to have them on a journey as well, and to learn alongside them and to set kids up for the rest of their life. And my mom and I always joke about the fact that because I was educated with a Mason method, we were trying to do things like a book of centuries, or nature study and things like that, right? And some things in my own journey of education I loved, and other things I didn't at various times. So, like I did not love doing a book of centuries where you write down interesting, dates or events that happen, and it kind of becomes your own little book of connections of history and literature and lots of different things. I didn't really like that until like 11th grade, or like I never loved sketching or drawing in my nature notebook. I just wrote down what I observed. And so my mom and I always joke about the fact that like one day that I will get better and, actually learn some art lessons so I can actually, paint a leaf outside or whatever. So, it's not a, it's not a like, oh, if you don't have, this quantity of knowledge and these facts memorized by the time that you graduate, that education has failed. It's a journey that we're all on together. And so I think that maybe I guess the encouragement would be to really embrace that and be okay with that sort of slow reflection and processing, because these are big ideas, and it's not something that we can just like absorb and really start living out all at once, because this really is a lifestyle, and these ideas are about how we learn and who we are as persons and what the implications are of that, which isn't something that we should be able to expect to just learn over a summer and then start perfectly living out in August or something.
Mm, mm. So I think if a parent is reasonably new to the Charlotte Mason principles, and it's very different from what the mum or dad's education was like, it's only reasonable to understand that it's going to take a while for you to transition out from the safe old way and learn the scary new way. But also to know that the experiences now of so many homeschoolers ahead of you that have already walked this road and can turn and say, if you like, as the cheer team along the sides, we've done this. Just trust to the system. It works. It really does work. Um, I think one of the things that surprised me, the unexpected bonus that I was not looking for when we were homeschooling our children, is that it was actually educating me again at the same time. It just broadened my boundaries and experiences and the books that I was now reading that I never was exposed to when I had my education. So that took me by surprise, which was wonderful. Your statement about the Charlotte Mason way of doing things is about a lifestyle. I'd like to just stop and reflect upon that for a little while. I think that's so, so very important because oftentimes we treat school like school is something that starts on a Monday morning at 9 o'clock and it finishes at 3. And everything else is not school, it's life. However, the Charlotte Mason gets you to go, no, 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 no. Your whole life is an opportunity to learn something. But when you've come from a system where you didn't even like education, it was boring and hard and you couldn't wait to get out of school, that's quite a transition in your mind to do too. So I want to hear from you about exploring that idea of Charlotte Mason being a lifestyle and that education is for your whole life. Please talk about that, Kathryn.
Oh man, also such big ideas. I
Mm,
mean, I think that it just comes down to um thinking not in terms of the checklist and the to-do, but more about it's not just kids that should be reading, good books and being outside or looking at paintings or listening to music. Like um these are important relationships for all of us. And so looking to sort of help ourselves grow in all these different areas, little by little. Mason talks about education as putting kids in a large room and opening doors for them. And so we want kids to feel like they have been introduced to many different rooms and then have the freedom to explore in them as they continue to grow and mature. And I think that's true, for us as educators as well. So whether that's, doing a read aloud at dinner, or my husband and I like listen to audiobooks in the car, right? Or, keeping a nature notebook yourself, or, maybe making time to go to a symphony or go to a play, or just having a little bit that you read, before bed each night or something like that. I think it's just looking for ways to feed your own soul as a person, and recognizing that that we each need it as well, and it's not just for the school years. And I think being okay with and recognizing our own limitations of I think there's books that I read over time where I'm like, wow, I just don't think I was ready for that, but maybe one day I will be. Like think I read Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis several years ago. And I was like, I know that there is more here, because he said this was like one of his favorite books. And like, I can just know that there's greater ideas in here, but I just am not old enough to get to it. But, and just being okay with the fact that I might need to put it aside, but, maybe in 5 years, or maybe I'm old enough now, I should try again, and just being okay with, we don't have to sit down and read like the Iliad in the original Greek or something like that. Like we can start with, enjoying picture books, and finding those living ideas in there, and just going where we're at and taking the next step forward. And I think that's true of how we need to approach our kids too, where it's not about, oh, well, by 7th grade, you should be doing this, or by the time you're 15, you should be doing this. It's more about where is this kid at, and what does the next step of relationship look like for them to engage in whatever the subject is.
That's often actually some of the doubts and worries that I hear from the parents is, how do I know that they're doing enough? How do I know that they're at the right level? And their worries based on preordained assumptions that they think education is. And sometimes it's also from their outside influences. It might be their own parents or a school teacher, auntie or something who's going, but is she at this level? And so it's a natural worry. However, nobody knows the child like you do. You know what your child is understanding, and you can know and be guided that, well, if there's, say, more than 5 words on a page that the child doesn't understand, probably not ready for that book. And if they're romping through something, okay, then you stretch it out a bit. And there's nobody better placed than you as the parent to know that. So trust yourself and the child, and it sets you free.
Yeah.
I was just going to reflect on part of what I realized as our children were growing up. It was something their auntie said to me, who is a school teacher, and lamented over that she just watched children in her own classes. So this would be around between 10, 11, 12. In New Zealand, we call that intermediate school. And by this stage, mostly the child has lost what she called the wow factor. Squashed out, squeezed out, not cool, don't get excited about anything, be dominated by what your peers' opinions are. And the spark and this glow, joy starts being squashed out of your life. And I never realized it at the time that our children, even though the eldest two were in school for 4 years, they hadn't reached that stage where it had been squelched. So they never lost what we came to see as the wow factor. And from that time onwards, I didn't want it to be an incidental thing. It became a part of our strategy. We want to encourage this. And so to illustrate, we have 3 daughters, 2 sons, 3 daughters. And our youngest child, a daughter, I was determined that I did not want her to grow up to be a little afraid of insects. So even though I'm seeing a spider and going, ooh, I'm saying to her, oh, wow, look at this. And trust, hope that she would, grow up thinking the same thing. So fast forward quite a few years, and it might be coincidence. You can't go backwards and find out. But that's exactly what she's like. She's the child that doesn't mind having one on her hand, that doesn't see any difference between looking at the wonder of the spider or the ugly insect to a beautiful bird. It's all, and she's the one that went to study zoology. So
Amazing.
that as a concept of what Charlotte Mason put forward in being, allowing the child to explore the outside, to be fascinated, to go and look, to be curious and interested, is a totally doable and valid thing, because now we're watching, Kathryn, our adult children still carrying on like this. And it's wonderful to see them out together and suddenly stop and look at this plant or the bird, or we were at a volcanic geyser type mud pool area in Rotorua recently, and they were just stopping, fascinated with the colors and watching the steam coming up, and they're in their 20s and 30s. It's absolutely fascinating to just to sit back and go, wow, this may not have been. So that's another encouragement for folks embarking on this wonderful approach. Trust to the system. It really does blossom. Anyway, that was a bit of a rave, but it felt relevant to what we're talking about too. All right then. So we've got families that are fascinated and very interested to know about going over to the Charlotte Mason approach. So they come to your website. What's the next thing they should do?
I mean, I think it kind of depends on, yeah, like what you're looking for specifically, right? Look, we have families that will come to us that, are coming because they've been, maybe with the Charlotte Mason approach, maybe with another approach, and, their child is really struggling with reading, or maybe they've been diagnosed with dyslexia or something like that. And so we have a lot of people who will come and find the Blue Orchard Bee resources that I mentioned earlier really helpful, that are talking about, okay, what does it look like to treat every child as a person, and to give every child, to put them in touch with all these relationships and support them. And so yeah, like those resources are free, and they talk about what does it look like to steward our neurochemistry. Andy Smith always talks about, and yeah, and to what does it look like to provide audiobooks, if reading is difficult, or what does habit training look like? So there's that avenue. Then there's the avenue of, we have a number of courses and certifications, and we've seen just a tremendous growth and interest in sort of more structured training and accountability. I'd say over the last several years, especially. So we have a core, we call it Conversations on Relational Education, or CORE. And that's our 8-week intensive course on Mason's methods and ideas. And so there's, teachers and parents that are just wanting to sort of dive into some of the key ideas and practices and methods of Charlotte Mason's approach. And that just gives a sort of, you would take it over a summer, or we'll run them in the fall or the winter and the spring, and gives a little bit more accountability and method to talking about these different things, and just the community to be able to interact with other educators in a variety of places and settings. So we'll see a lot of families go there, and then some people would just sign up for the newsletter and enjoy the resources that get sent out through there. We try to post whether that's previous conference sessions and notes from that. There was one that went out not too long ago on Charlotte Mason and Sunday school. What does it look like to bring Charlotte Mason's approach into our churches? Or questions about narration or book reviews and whatnot. And then people that are looking for curriculum and want resources to support their education, whether that's just a subject or two, or whether they want the more wide scale membership. So there's sort of a number of avenues and different sort of ways you can go, but I think that we kind of bring that on ourselves by having a vision that is to support educators and students in every setting. So I think I'd like to say we have something for everyone.
It sounds like it. So other settings, you've got Sunday school, you've got the home, whether somebody initiates themselves or gets the whole deal, and everything in between, as we said. But what other settings could be included? Other contexts, schooling contexts, would you include?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the largest sort of movements we've seen, especially in North America and in the US, but we're hearing about it across the world really, is the movement toward micro schools and co-ops, and then Charlotte Mason schools as well. So we've sort of increasingly been putting out more resources for to support educators in those settings as well, because I think that obviously there's still so many people that are homeschooling the sort of traditional way that we're familiar with, and mostly sort of just doing things together as a family. But more and more, I think co-ops and hybrid schools are sprouting up, where people are saying, we love the flexibility of homeschooling, but we also really love the community of being able to do it with friends. And sometimes that looks like a co-op where you get together once a week and you do a couple subjects, or maybe just once a month and you go on nature walks together. And sometimes that is looking, I think, more increasingly like a little bit more structure, where micro schools or hybrid schools are meeting for just a day or 2 days or 3 days. We have alveary schools or hybrid schools that are kind of run the gamut, everything from a 5-day-a-week private school to schools that are, meeting once or twice during the week and then assigning work for the other days at home, to schools that are just meeting once or twice a week, and, families are doing whatever they like their other days. And then a few charter schools for us in the US, that's the public schools as well. So, yeah, so I think that there really are just a lot of exciting new ideas and ways about doing education, sort of with that flexibility and with that customizability that we love from homeschooling, but in classroom settings as well.
It really is something for everyone, because I'm thinking of the modern lifestyle where, let's say, the mum still either needs to or wants to work. Yeah, sure, they could come home and learn to live and do life on one income. But not everybody actually wants to do that. And there needs to be some kind of blend in the middle there, where we can't actually say, yes, but this is the way you do homeschooling. You have to be prepared to do that, because there is this group that doesn't want to and can't. So what I'm hearing you say then is that there are opportunities for people to, say, you have a co-op or a private school or a hub where the children can go maybe for a couple of days a week while mum works, and then they can be at home for the other few days. Is that what you mean? Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, for sure. I think it runs the gamut. I think there's some, mothers that are involved in the teaching of the schools in those days. And then there's others that are, yeah, they have a job and are working on those days or, yeah, I think there's the whole spectrum. And I think that is the beauty of Charlotte Mason's approach, that it's not a curriculum in the sense that it's not just this list of books or this list of activities to do, but it is this way of life. And so, um, even if your kids are in the traditional public education system, I think Charlotte Mason still has something to offer in the way that you develop relationships at home and what you do at home and what your home atmosphere is like and how you talk about school and life, So I think that is, that's the encouraging part, because it's no matter where we find ourselves, I think there's always a way that we can live out these relationships with God and with others and the world around us and grow in them.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I emphasize when I talk about homeschooling to other people is that there is no one right way to homeschool or home educate. And I think those of us who did do it by ourselves 5 days a week or 7 days a week at home, since we're talking about a lifestyle here, it's very easy to put that expectation on others and go, well, we did it and you're not homeschooling properly unless you do it like that. So it can become a way of taking your own experience and then passing judgment, whether that's perceived by families or it's actually what is happening. And I think that's something that we have to guard against, that for families who want to home educate, find out what it is that they want, what they're capable of, and start with that, because
Yeah.
as time goes on, it may well ripple out into something else. And you don't have to do it all through school, the schooling years. That's the other thing. You're not a real homeschooler if you've done it from birth through to the end. So I think there is a lot to be said. It's a small enough community as it is. Let's not make it hard unnecessarily for people.
Yeah.
Um, Before I ask you about your own experience, because this will really introduce beautiful layering onto what you're doing with the CMI, how does the Institute help families navigate towards the end of the high school years, towards graduation, with a view to uni, although not necessarily so, but to finish school? How does the Institute do that for people?
Mhm. Yeah, no, and I think that you're totally right that um like some families might homeschool for a couple years and then not do others. And yeah, everyone's on a journey and we just have to recognize that. And yeah. Yeah, no, like I said, we provide lesson plans and resources all the way through high school, but that obviously does get more challenging in those high school years. So we provide more, like, for instance, we have a chemistry course and we provide more video help for that, because we know that there's a lot of mothers and parents and teachers who might not feel as equipped to teach chemistry. That's a little bit harder of a lab science or whatever. And so yeah, that has like more video support from a scientist who made the videos. And then we also work really hard to like help kids start taking even more ownership and independence in their education themselves, because obviously once you graduate and you go out to university, the weight of self-education really is on the student. And so we don't want to just have parents or teachers being so involved all the way across that the kid is unprepared to deal with that themselves. And so we start really encouraging, starting even in those like that, I guess, like 12, 13 years old, and then up through high school. We start writing lesson plans to the students themselves, and then adding things like accountability checks, where we might say, go show this to your parent or your teacher. And we start trying to transfer some of that actual practical process of education to the students, so that maybe they're making their own schedule or printing off lessons, or they're the ones that's looking at the lesson plans to figure out what pages they're supposed to be reading or what they're supposed to be writing about for a composition lesson or whatnot. So we start trying to give students more ownership and responsibility for education in those high school years, sort of structurally. And then I think we also look at sort of general state national standards. Mason was looking at sort of what kids need to pass for various examinations in her day. So we do similar things, and we say, well, in general, what is the average high school student graduating and getting ready to go to university? What do they need in order to be able to do that successfully? Like, we don't want kids to have rooms that are close to them just because we, didn't offer whatever physics to the level that other people might require. And obviously, like you were saying, that still is highly dependent on each person, where some students are going to, they're not going to get as far into a particular room of a subject as others. But we don't want sort of the overall structure and the lessons that we're providing to be that limiting factor. So we talk with experts, and we talk to scientists, and we talk to historians, and we say, well, like, if you had kids that had this education and had read these books and engaged with these ideas, would they be ready for your classroom? So we've connected with a number of different professors and various topics to kind of get that opinion and make sure that we are setting kids up well to succeed, and no matter where they go after us.
So how would, let's say a graduating student who has only been doing Mason education now wants to apply for a particular university. So let's go with the States, if you like. Is there a system over there whereby you just take what you've done, like putting together a portfolio, for instance, presenting that to the application board, and that, so you haven't got the school exams or the SATs, you've only got this. Is that there? Can they do that?
Yeah, I mean, for us, every state is kind of different. So, I mean, a lot of times we'll still encourage students to take the SAT or the ACT or whatever sort of standardized test, just if a college is requiring that. But I think in general, we sort of try to spread the feast, but then, yeah, different states have different requirements. So whether they're just submitting just a transcript of here's the work we did, and you kind of make it look as much like a sort of normal transcript as possible, just to, so they don't look at it and think, what in the world is happening here? So there's just the gamut in the States, from very sort of hands-off, just submit your transcript and submit a writing sample and whatnot, to a much more intense portfolio. But usually, I think, unfortunately, public education standards are quite low. And most of the public education and sort of university professors that I've talked to or heard of are generally quite depressed about the state of university education. And so I think in general, we see Mason students being more than well prepared in most areas. And I think sometimes, there's specific disciplines, right, where if, a kid wants to go into zoology, well, make sure that you make sure you do those lab sciences all through high school. Like, maybe don't take a break on that one year. You might take a break on Plutarch or Shakespeare or something like that here or there, but maybe don't take a break on those lab sciences if that's what your kid is interested in. So I think just being mindful of each family's sort of particular context is important in those high school years as well.
The motivation for me directing that question to you is that's often a question that the parents are also asking, but more often than not coming from outside of the family. Well, what are you going to do at X age? How are they going to get into university? How are they going to get a qualification? So thank you for that. Now, along those lines, there's something very interesting going on in the whole tertiary education mentoring section, and I don't know what you're observing in this, but here we go. In that, you've already touched on that the schooling system is not what it could be. Well, the same can be said of the university system, very much captured by cultural Marxism. And more often than not, the young ones are going into uni and coming out at the other end with a huge tutoring bill, sometimes with a degree where there may be very few job opportunities, and or a salary that is hardly going to be paying back what they owe, let alone setting them up in life. So there has to be an alternative to this. So we're noticing that there is more pursuing now of introducing strategic mentoring into a young adult's life. So let's say, for instance, somebody would like to learn business and finance skills. Well, traditionally, you'd go to uni and you'd go and get a business degree. But there is this opportunity where you can find a good mentor in the financial industry, and under uh, arranging with them, you're going to shadow them and you're going to be with them all the time. You may even pay them because you're going to pay fees at uni anyway, and they're worthy of some pay, but you're learning alongside them in their industry for, let's say, 3 years. In the second year, you might go to another country where now you have to learn another language at the same time, but you're still in the financial industry, and you do the same thing for the third year. So at the end of the third year, which would have been your third year at uni, you have learnt more than probably what any, safe to say, more than what a student would have learnt at university. You are already embedded in the networking arena, knowing the right people. You don't have to relearn anything because you've been taught it in a different manner, and you're ready to go. And I'm hearing more and more of that. There are some things like, in the STEMs, medicine, obviously, engineering, although you can learn some engineering as an apprentice, which is mentoring. But especially in the humanities, that's a valid way of looking at navigating your young adult through those years. So I've just introduced that to you. Are you seeing anything like that in your own environment of the Institute? What are you observing, Kathryn?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know if the US is behind you or just sort of it's just sort of percolating, but I'd say that in general, I wouldn't say that's become like mainstream or like extremely common yet here, but I think that we are seeing more and more trade schools. Like I know several people who have become electricians, and through that mentorship type model, sort of really taking off. And actually my youngest sister is looking at, she's a senior in high school right now, and looking at a sort of alternative college that's trying to like combine both the sort of reading, discussing sort of humanities, liberal arts type discussions and classwork with also having kids working and apprenticing so that they have those real life work experience as well. So I think it is happening. But yeah, it's kind of a weird sort of that's happening on one level, and then on the other level, the universities are just getting more and more expensive, So I feel like that those are sort of both happening at the same time. So I guess it's kind of the jury's out on exactly what will happen next, obviously. And I do think that the other thing that is obviously happening sort of across more widespread is the increase of online schooling and online college degrees in general, because of the cost or just because the need to or the desire to have that work experience while also doing school, as so many people are trying to do, they're working as well as doing online school, or they're just finding more creative ways to fit that in, because just going to a traditional 4-year university and living on campus is becoming less and less financially and practically feasible. Yeah.
Yes, I'm not saying it's becoming common or mainstream, but it's definitely a trend that you can see the early stages in, and you can see it's working too. You're getting highly qualified, experienced young ones, very capable, without the expenses now that they have to repay and everything that goes along with that. And it's also bypassing a system that philosophically or for faith reasons you may not even want to be involved with. So there's that too. It's just good to know that there are alternatives from what I see as a very captured, broken system. So it'll be interesting to see where things go from here. All right.
So I think it's hard because I do think that on the other hand, I went to like a smaller Christian liberal arts school, and majored in English, and I also like worked while I was going to school, and I at the sort of time I thought I was cool, I was sort of paying my way through school or whatever, and but I also looking back, I see how valuable it also was to have that time to really you don't really have that sort of focused time to be able to read and think and write and interact with people who have thought about these ideas at depth that you wouldn't necessarily have the chance to yeah, to just spend that time otherwise. So I think that, yeah, it's a sort of a catch-22 where it's such a privilege and a gift if you do have the resources of, schools that are, that are affordable, or that you can make work, and you don't have to, be trying to live two lives at once, trying to pay your way, or deal with the system that's difficult and broken. But there's still so many professors and experts out there that have done such great work and have so much to offer students. I wish they were just more accessible sometimes.
Yes, yes, yeah, indeed. I would like to ask you more about your own educational background. You've said you were homeschooled, that you also grew up under the Charlotte Mason principles, which must make your job a lot easier because you understand right from the get-go what's going on. So could you give us an overview of what your home education looked like for you, how it was done? Was it before the curriculums were available? So what did mum do? And well, let's start with that, and then I'll direct it somewhere from there.
Yeah, no. Yeah, my mom, I think, read For the Children's Sake by Susan Schaefer Macaulay, the sort of intro book to Charlotte Mason, right? When I was pretty young. And so I think by the time I was like in, maybe I was 6, 7, 8 years old, something like that. She was sort of fully captured by Charlotte Mason's approach and trying to implement that in our home. And I'm the oldest of 5. So I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. So I was the guinea pig. So, she's reading along. As I sort of moved up through the grades, she'd be like, okay, well, we're supposed to start written narrations now. And so I'd be like, well, here we go. Or like Charlotte Mason says commonplace books are a thing. You should just try one, So definitely that very much that sort of early stage of, there weren't all the curriculums around. There were great book lists and resources, but definitely not curriculums and sort of full scale programs like we see today. So yeah, we had just this sort of like rhythms of reading books together, reading books independently, narrating, lots of narration notebooks, lots of, with multiple ages, right? Younger, there's about a 10-year gap between me and my youngest sister. So, mom's doing school on the porch with one kid to work on, reading lessons or whatever, and other kids are around the house reading and narrating, and then coming back together. And we were doing Shakespeare in the afternoon when the younger kids are napping or going outside and doing nature walks and whatnot. So yeah, I really think my education was a gift, and I look back with a lot of really happy memories of our time in the sort of formal education years. But I think that also one of the really formative things was as I got older, and inevitably, I'm sure your kids probably had some of the similar experiences of being like, well, like, mom, like, why do we do this? Or like, why do we narrate? Or like, I don't have, this load of homework like my other friends do or whatnot. And so I remember just those sort of formative conversations where my mom would be like, oh, well, like, this is why we narrate, because like, this is how we know things. And, even reading ourselves, Charlotte Mason's book to students and thinking about sort of, beginning to think about educational philosophy, even as, getting into high school and whatnot. So I think that was a really formative part of my education as well. And I think why I'm still passionate about it today. And it's just that it was never something that was done to me, but more this is a way to live, this is a way to learn. And as I got older, I think it was increasingly explained to me. So I think I started to take more sort of ownership of it. I started going to CMI conferences when I was a teenager as well. So I was, sitting in the workshops and whatnot and learning as well that way, which I think gave me a lot of respect, I think, for what my mom was trying to do at home, because I knew it was coming from somewhere. It wasn't just some random idea she came up with.
So around you as you're growing up, were you in a community where there were other families also using Mason's principles?
Yes and no. We had co-ops throughout the years, sort of at various stages. We lived a little bit further out from like where some of our friends were, so we didn't typically have like that like weekly co-op that some I guess is some people have, or is like a little bit more common now. So we typically would do things like field trips together, or we did Shakespeare like read alouds in the summers together and stuff like that. So I didn't have a ton of co-op. We mostly were at home doing things, but my mom has done different things over the years and, done co-ops where they did labs together and stuff like that with some of my younger siblings. So I think, especially being the guinea pig, I had a lot more of the individual, like, go do your school and report back kind of a thing. Just practically speaking, when you have four other younger siblings, there was more of that juggling. And I think as we've left the house and she's had less to juggle, they've experimented with some other forms of getting together with co-ops and other people. And yeah.
So it's interesting for people who are listening that, if you like, they're looking at, I was going to use the word product, but that is just so wrong. They're looking at a person who has come into adulthood and she's normal and productive and just got this beautiful attitude towards life, ongoing in education. And she started right from the beginning like this. Something's going on here, because you're the evidence, you're the visual evidence, as you know, our children too, is that this actually works. So if you had something to say to mums who had their doubts about the Charlotte Mason approach, um, is there, what would you say to reassure them, apart from saying, well, here's the result of it? Is there anything particular that you could say, look, hang in there because XYZ? Any quick message for them?
Well, I think that, kind of like you've already pointed out, that I think a Charlotte Mason education is a feast for every person, no matter who they are, where they're at. Like, I love the flexibility, and I think that gives the reassurance that it can work. It won't look the same for every person and every child, but it is feeding each child and helping them grow where they're at. So, like, I think even like you've mentioned your daughter being fascinated with zoology, and I'm like more of like, I sort of naturally tend to more of like the books and writing type of person, but like my brother is into aviation and like works in aviation and fixes airplanes and does GPS systems or whatever. And then, I have a sister who's like in marketing and business and like other things. So I think that just seeing the variety of children who are served with this type of education is reassuring, that it's not just for, the kids who love reading or the kids who are, they just love to be outside or whatever. It's about helping our kids go into all these different rooms and helping them grow and expand as persons. So I think the thing that gives me reassurance, so maybe the thing hopefully that would give other people reassurance, is just that it comes back to this, like, these foundational ideas of who are we as persons, how has God made us, how do we learn? And I think that there's an incredible sense of confidence that comes from being able to trace back your methods and your hows and your whats, when you can trace them back to the whys. I think that gives me a lot of confidence in being able to say there's flexibility. We can look at the people in front of us, but ultimately we know why we're doing what we're doing. And obviously teasing that out is a journey and a lifetime of thinking and learning, but still I think Mason is so uniquely cohesive. She's practical and beautiful and cohesive at the same time. I think some people have great practical ideas and some people have great overarching, big picture ideas. And Mason was so insightful at being able to tie both of them together, which I think is where a lot of the confidence and reassurance for me and her method comes.
Mm-hmm. That's a lovely overview of what it was like for you, and reassuring too for parents at the coalface. So here's a bit of a reflective question for you, if you like, Kathryn. If you now could sit down, let's say, with a young homeschooling girl, let's say she might be maybe 8 or 9, is there anything you can think of to tell her to be mindful of, to make the most of? What advice would you give to a young child who's under the Charlotte Mason approach, we'll say?
I think that I help out with the high schoolers at my church, and I also used to help out with the middle schoolers in the state. So that sort of like 12 through 17-year-old, I guess I've I've sort of spent a lot of time with them at my church. And so obviously I've thought about like, how do I bring Charlotte Mason into these different spaces and whatnot. And so I think that one of the things that I always sort of found myself saying in just trying to encourage in general, kids that I interact with is just giving just those brief explanations of why we do what we do. When you ask a kid to narrate or something like that, just being like, well, this is just how we know. And like, this helps us to remember what we read and think about it. So I think one of my favorite things to do, when I'm talking with younger kids, if I'm giving sort of advice in that sort of sense, is to maybe just reassure them that like they can trust their parents and that that's a good thing. And that, but then I think also just, I love to just hear what kids are reading and what they've seen and what they've experienced. And because I think that there's often so much more going on in kids' heads than we give them credit for. And I think sometimes the best conversations come out of those natural, like wonderings. What are you wondering about? What have you noticed recently? What have you been reading about? Some of those just natural conversations,
So if there was a slightly older child now in their teens, so now they're thinking more abstractly in those kind of years, how different would that be if you were going to talk to somebody now that's a bit older in her teens? What else would you be saying to them or giving them advice on at their lovely age?
Yeah, I mean, I think that encouraging the questions. I think that, as a teen myself, like I remember asking lots of those questions of, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? And so I think encouraging the questions and taking them seriously and trying to point back to the whys behind different things. So whether that's, just that sense of, your parents are big enough for your questions. And ultimately, obviously, like that is just a bigger picture of God is big enough for our questions. So questions are not something that are off limits, but that, ultimately in a situation where your parents love you and obviously ultimately like that your God loves you, then we can bring our questions and know that they will be answered with love and a sense to like help us understand, right? So it's not just about you need to, narrate or you need to do this or that just because mom tells you to, but it's because there's a why, and the why, and you're old enough at that point to understand the why. And you can start to grapple with those ideas for yourself. And ultimately, I think that, Mason talks a lot about training the will and this like difference between I want and I will. And so having those conversations with teens about, well, you might want to do this, but you have the choice as a person and whether you will do this, and you can exercise your will, and you can, you can choose to apply yourself or, be clean your room or whatever it might be, that you don't have to be captivated by whatever your wants are in a particular day, but that we can grow in exercising our will. But I think that in general, like just encouraging kids to find the beauty and the wonder in life. I think I see so many teens that are just sort of caught in a utilitarian picture of education that, I don't need to know about Charlemagne. Like someone literally told me yesterday, I don't need to know about Charlemagne because I'm going to be a kindergarten teacher. And I was like, I wanted to be like, no, but like, that's not what learning history is about. Like, yes, you don't need to know that fact because you're going to be a kindergarten teacher, but like, who knows what an encounter with Charlemagne and thinking about him in real life, reading a biography of him, whatever how that might change how you think about life and so many different things. So I think just trying to encourage that all of education is about learning and about loving God, that there isn't a sacred and secular divide between, the things that you do on a Sunday and the things that you do during the week, but all of this is about loving God. Those are some of the things that I talk about with my girls in my church context.
I'd like you to give your mum a message from me and also to your father, who may not have been at the coalface of homeschooling, but undoubtedly an incredible rock and support. Tell your mum she has done an amazing job because I don't think as homeschooling parents we often get that, because you trust to it and you don't know what's going to happen out of this. And it's such a relief to get to the end and see that, hey, this actually worked. So I think your mum is absolutely amazing. And yeah, she needs to know that. Mm, mm.
I do too. I think it's also so fun to see the ways that I think because Mason's methods are true to how we learn, that they pop up in like sort of unexpected places. Like I went and studied internationally in China for a year after I graduated, and I realized I was like trying to learn, writing, and Chinese characters are so different than English letters and alphabets or whatever. And I realized that I had to do picture studies on them because that was the only way I could think of to like think about learning the characters, because they were not phonetic like I was used to. And yeah, and just like I was talking with our executive or our operations director the other day, and she was talking about like, people talk about the importance of stories and just business and marketing and all these sorts of things. And I think Mason's principles just they keep popping up, in so many different places, that it's kind of an adventure.
Yes. And to see that they apply outside of your own home culture too. They are actually universal principles.
Yeah.
That's Kathryn, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to at the moment?
I don't think so. I think we've talked about so many different things, but yeah, I mean, I think we're just honored at the Charlotte Mason Institute to be able to get a picture and a little window to so many exciting things happening in so many different families and schools and classrooms. And we just love that we get to come alongside, and whether that's through curriculum or courses or whatever that is, it's just a privilege. And it's a privilege for me to be a part of that as well.
Yes, yes, it's a privilege, and it's you get paid for it now. It's a wonderful thing. It's been your whole
Even
life.
better. Yeah.
It's been your whole life, and what a gift you must bring too, because your understanding and perception, it's all you've ever known, and that's a rich body of experience to bring.
It's been
Well,
interesting like going from that like intuitive knowledge to actually like reading more of her and like getting that like more like, oh, she says this about this and this about this, and going from that like, oh yeah, I experienced that, but now I'm reading where she said that. And so yeah,
yeah.
always a journey.
Oh gosh, yes, yeah, yeah. Well, I am really grateful for your time. You've been very generous with it, and your thoughts and your personal reflections too. Stories always matter to people, don't they? They want to hear what it was actually like for you. So thank you for telling us. And I think you've done a wonderful service for people who are interested in Charlotte Mason. Obviously, I'm biased because it's what we always did too, but I was never interested in changing over to something else, even though I got a bit of FOMO every so often, because it works. It actually works. So thank you for telling us the how and why of that.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank you,
again,
Kat.
Kathryn. I will put your link below in the description box for interested folk to follow up to the Institute. You guys do an amazing work. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a privilege and a delight.
Oh, thank you, Kathryn. That was wonderful.